Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. This is ML Miller. This time around, I'm looking at Leigh Whannell's The Invisible Man from 2020. This film is newly released on Blu-ray and DVD. The Invisible Man was actually one of the last films I saw in the theater, and I just rewatched it again on Blu-ray, so it's really fresh in my mind. Leigh Whannell delivers a powerful new iteration of The Invisible Man in this 2020 remake. But I wanted to point out right off the bat that Universal should be ashamed for not crediting H.G. Wells for the original idea and James Whale for the original film. That said, this was a widely entertaining blockbuster of a film. I can understand why it's a crowd pleaser, as it delivers everything fans of mainstream horror might want. It is far from a perfect film, and I'll be sure to delve into that in a little bit. But all in all, I have to say I'm pretty proud of Leigh Whannell, who seems to have finally come out from behind the shadow of James Wan, who he partnered with for Insidious, Saw, and The Conjuring. And good on him for doing that. On top of all that, the film provides yet another stellar performance from the star, Elisabeth Moss. Let's dive deep into The Invisible Man 2020. The film opens just as the trailer does. More on that later. With Elisabeth Moss's character, Cecilia, gathering her things in the middle of the night and sneaking out of her husband's glass-walled mansion. Before doing so, she conveniently walks through his lab to shut down the security system, allowing us a glimpse at some suspicious sci-fi tech equipment that is obviously going to come into play later. After narrowly escaping, Cecilia goes into hiding with her sister's friend James, played by Aldis Hodge, and his daughter Sydney, played by Reid. All of it is set up by her sister Emily, played by Harriet Dyer. But it turns out all of the hiding is for naught, as Adrian Griffin, played by The Haunting of Hill House's Oliver Jackson-Cohen, seems to have killed himself after Cecilia left. Adrian also left her a hefty payday in his will, according to his lawyer brother Tom, played by Michael Dorman. But just when Cecilia is starting to breathe easy and thinks her abuser is gone, she starts seeing things that lead her to believe that her optics designer ex-husband has turned himself invisible and is attempting to drive her crazy. The thematics of The Invisible Man, even though extremely different from the original Universal film, is a strong one. Just as Jack Griffin attempted to be noticed in the world of science and ironically made himself invisible to do so in the original James Whale classic, Cecilia is the invisible one in this movie, as she has great difficulty in convincing anyone to notice and believe her when she attests that she has been abused and is still being abused by her husband. There are plenty of films that play into the hysterical woman trope. It's a theme used in everything from Rosemary's Baby to Aliens, and more recently in The Lodge and Hereditary. It's a very common scene in horror films where a frantic woman pleads with someone to believe her and no one does, thinking she is just being crazy and hysterical. The fight for a woman to be heard, especially in this day and age, makes The Invisible Man topical, and I can see why this film resonated with the masses. Whannell exploits this to the fullest and puts Moss through the emotional ringer. Moss is as believable as the victim as she is the aggressor, as the tides turn back and forth and back again in this twisted plot. I have to give it to Whannell, though, who could have went the easy route with the theme of obsession with fame, which was the main theme from the original Invisible Man, for Griffin to be noticed by his peers in the scientific community, but instead he tackled a more topical story that allowed for some satisfying moments of female empowerment. That said, Whannell shines away from being preachy with the theme. Instead, he just relies on the same format that has been used in horror for ages, that of the woman being abused until the point where she has had enough and fights back. See any horror film with a final girl for that old chestnut, and while it isn't as fresh a concept as Whannell and Company want to sell it as, it still proves that horror is one of the most empowering genres out there today and has always been that way. Moss gives it her all here and carries this film capably from scene one until the end. Shifting focus from the Invisible Man himself to the woman who is not seen, even when she is reaching in all directions for help, is a meaty role for Moss to chew on, and gnaw on it she does. That doesn't mean that The Invisible Man is a perfect film, and I'd be doing a disservice not to point out a few of the more major flaws. The most glaring one is the tell, don't show story of Cecilia's abuse. Had we not seen the trailers with Moss floating through the air, fighting an unseen attacker, and had this film been sold as a more psychological horror story where we don't know if Cecilia is just nuts or being attacked by some unseen enemy, I think they could have played with the idea on whether the Invisible Man exists or not and make an extremely interesting movie filled with psychological angst and paranoia. But that's not what they did. Cecilia talks of psychological abuse as well as physical abuse, but we never really see any of this happen. I understand we're living in an age where the accuser is always right until proven otherwise, and that might be a good rule to follow in the real world, but it's simply bad storytelling to have people tell us how bad a person is and expect us to believe it without actually showing it. Even though the monster is obviously real, even up until the end, we're simply supposed to take Cecilia's word for it that she was abused. A flashback or a scene establishing some kind of abuse in the earlier portions of the film would have made Cecilia's redemption feel much more justified and her plight that much more convincing. This leads to my second problem. We are never really shown if Cecilia and Adrian were ever happy or why these two got together in the first place. We're plopped into the first scene of Cecilia escaping and extremely fearful of Adrian, but we never see why she might have been attracted to him. Was Cecilia abused before, possibly by her father or someone else in her family? Is she somehow now attracted to that type of person? Did Adrian change over the years? Was it something with the optics experimentation that could have had some type of damaging effect on his mental state, as it did with Jack Griffin in the original? None of these questions are even attempted to be answered. We are only to know that we are supposed to dislike Adrian because Cecilia tells us so. Sure, later events in the film make us believe it, or do they? The ambiguous way this one ends leaves a lot of questions unanswered. I recommend you not to think too hard about the story, or these plot holes become rather obvious. I guess we are to believe Adrian is a sick jerk, because Cecilia tells us. But why go to the extraneous lengths to fake one's own death, give her an inheritance, only to drive her insane so that the inheritance is taken away? Think about that too hard and the house of cards crumbles. This is one of those big bombastic movies that you will have more fun with if you just don't ask those types of questions. Despite these plot holes and story stumbles, Whannell delivers a mainstream and safe but suspenseful thriller. The effects are, of course, top-notch. The Inviso-suit is definitely scary and used in ways to make the heart jump and the spine tingle. It definitely is imposing and looks otherworldly, and I liked it quite a bit. The action scenes never let up, and this film does have a satisfying forward momentum, leaving very little time for breaths to be taken. Plus, Whannell really knows how to set up some great scenes of tension. There's a scare at the beginning that almost had me out of my seat, and that's something very few directors can get out of me. Still, this is a safe film where those who you think will die most likely will. The abuse is only talked about because I guess seeing that on screen would make the audience feel too uncomfortable, as if feeling uncomfortable is something one needs to watch out for in a horror film. The film wrapped up in a satisfying manner that seems to encapsulate the current trend of doing what feels right instead of upholding the law. I can understand that. It's a Universal monster movie, so it's got to be broad and satisfying to the cheaper seats. But still, Whale got away with a heck of a lot more subtext and suggested atrocities in his monster films than the horrors this movie shows. One last gripe and I'm out. Universal, have more faith in your films. Whoever did the trailers for The Invisible Man should be clearing out their desks and turning in their keys. Stop giving away all the best stuff in the trailers. There's a way to sell this film as the tense psychological thriller that it is, and then there's the trailers used to sell this film. When are the studios going to learn that giving away all of the effects shots, spoiling all of the beats and twists, and basically depicting a Cliff Notes version of the entire film is not a way to sell your movie? It's such a shame that so much time was put into making this movie, and some shitty ad team comes in and butchers it because they're scared that no one will go see it without revealing all of the money shots. Almost every important scene is in the trailers in some shortened fashion. Scenes that would have knocked me back fell flat because I'd seen them 30 times over in the previews. Stop it. It's stupid. It just shows your lack of faith in the project. You should be confident and show some belief in your film. It's a good one, but you ruined it with the commercials. I hope one day directors will stand up and take control of how their films are advertised. This ad campaign was utter shit. Despite my many criticisms, the trailer rant, and my fondness for the horrors of yesteryear, Whannell has delivered a strong remake with thematic heft, phenomenal performances, and tip-top special effects. The Invisible Man 2020 is a crowd pleaser, and even though it's flawed, I had a big old blast with it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like down below. Please share this with all of your friends on social media. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications for the next time I'm going to be posting a video, which will be very soon. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Take care.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your